Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Across the Ocean. My name's James in Miami.
And this is Matthias straight from Zurich.
And we get together on a monthly basis to bring you a show packed full of hints and tips to help make you the best underwater filmmaker that you can be. Buddy, how are you? Good to see you, mate.
I'm very well, thank you. Very good to see you too. It's been a while and I think we've got quite a few things to talk about in today's episode.
We absolutely do, We're carrying on with our theme of getting the most out of your action cameras, and we love action cameras. Yes, we are professional underwater filmmakers, but we think action cameras have revolutionized the way that people make images underwater because they have a really attractive price point and they are an ideal starter for people looking to get into taking photos and particularly video underwater. So Matthias and I have two different choices when it comes to action cameras. I prefer the good old GoPro Hero9, and Matthias, what have you got there?
And I've got the DJI Osmo Action that I've been using for the past 1.5 to 2 years.
And what we thought we'd do, this is the much anticipated and highly requested video, is take you through the settings that we set the camera to when we're about to go on a dive. This is something that I know on my channel people have been requesting for a long time because I've done a number of videos on Divers Ready about GoPro accessories, how to handle a GoPro underwater, lighting tips and so on. And people have been asking, oh, you know, what are your settings and you know, what are the menu options and this kind of stuff. I said, yeah, I'll make that video. And I'm very happy to be able to make it with you, Matthias, because you also have the DJI, so this is going to serve a double function for a lot of people out there. So super awesome. Why don't you go first and take us through the DJI Osmo menu options that you select?
Sure, absolutely, my pleasure. Now, as you said, James, I also think that action cams are an incredible, valuable tool when it comes to filming underwater, just because they are so small, so handy, and the price point is unbeatable, really, in my opinion. Now, the DJI Osmo will dive right into the menu. First of all, obviously, we'll have to turn it on, and then you'll have a couple of different options. Now, the way this works is you can pull with your finger on the or above the LCD screen, and if you go from top down, you'll get to the main menu options, and there's a couple of things. First of all, I want to talk about the icon that is on the right top corner, and if we tap on that one, this is our main settings control panel, if you want to put it that way. I want to go through some of these, not all of these, because some I don't find very useful for filming underwater, so I'll keep them out, but I'll definitely dive a little deeper into the settings that I find very valuable here. Voice control obviously doesn't really work underwater, so I've never ever used it on land, so I'm not gonna get into that. Snapshot, something that I don't really use, and the quick switch, again, something that I don't really use a lot. Further down, I personally like to have all my sound on the camera turned off. I don't know how you stand to this point, James, but me personally, it just annoys hearing the beeping and all the different sounds a action cam makes, so I keep that off. There's a point which says face-oriented exposure. This is something that can be useful when you're filming people, preferably on land, because underwater the camera won't really recognize a diver behind a mask, so this is something I don't really use. Another feature that I use absolutely and every single time is the grid. I think this is incredibly valuable to be able to actually have the grid on your screen, so it helps you compose your image when you're underwater, and just be sure to get a really nice composition of the subject that you're trying to capture. Anti-flicker, something we don't really need underwater. Now here's an important one: screen auto sleep, rec screen, and auto power off. Now these settings, I personally would probably set them to the highest possible, which basically is never. Simple reason, what does it actually do? The screen auto sleep basically puts the screen, as it says, into sleep after a certain amount of minutes that you can define. Now, this can be useful if you're trying to conserve battery life on your camera, but other than that, it is more annoying than anything else to me if the screen keeps turning off all the time and I have to reactivate it manually again. Most important, I find, is to make sure that you have the rec screen off on never. Simple reason, I really don't like that the screen goes off while I'm recording something. And you could basically set it so after a minute of recording, it just turns off the screen to save battery power. And it happened to me the first time I used the camera, and ever after that I made sure to set it to never, because it's one of the worst things for me to happen, that it goes off underwater while I'm filming and now I don't know what I'm capturing and I can't push any button, because as soon as I push any other button, it's gonna stop the recording. So make sure to have that on never. That's the most important setting, or one of the most important settings here. And then the auto power off. It's basically, again, a power saving tool that will turn the camera off after a certain amount of minutes if you don't use it. We've got LEDs that we can define whether they should be turned on or off. Your language, date and time. You can format your card. You can reset to factory settings. This is an important one in my opinion too. If for whatever reason you've changed a setting on your camera and you don't know what you've done and how you can reverse it, you can always just reset to factory settings and you'll basically have like a brand new action camera when it comes to the settings, and you can start all over again putting your settings into the camera. Moving along, there's a couple other things on this main panel here. I don't think we have to go into too much detail here. One that I do want to mention though is the icon on the very left top hand, and that is your custom settings. Not entirely sure, I think the GoPros can do that as well, but the DJI Osmo, you can set several different custom settings, and that is actually a really good idea, because you can then switch very quickly between different settings while being underwater if the screen works. This is something I'll get back to in a minute. But you can set different custom menus. I've got, for example, one which is 4K 60, using the Rocksteady, the D-Cine-like picture profile and underwater white balance. And this is a setting that I use whenever I film without lights, right? And then I've got a custom setting 2, which is the same, 4K 60, Rocksteady activated, D-Cine-like, but this time I'm using a custom white balance set to 5600 Kelvin. And this is the setting that I'm using when I'm using lights to film with the Osmo Action underwater. And my lights, they output a light or a color temperature, I better say, of 5600, and that's the reason why I set my custom white balance to 5600, so I can get it as close as possible to the best possible white balance I can achieve when filming with lights. But let's get to some other settings here. If we scroll from down up on the screen, we'll get to the resolution settings and the frame rate. Personally, I always use 4K, the highest resolution on the Osmo Action. I just think it makes sense to use the highest possible resolution, so you can then reframe your image if you really have to. Action cameras oftentimes are not specifically good at capturing macro stuff, so using 4K and then outputting in Full HD in 1080, using that technique, you can then just crop in on the image that you've captured and kind of simulate a little bit more of a macro shot, if you want to put it that way. And when we come to the frame rate, I normally film in 60 frames per second on the Osmo Action, again because it is my B-roll cam that I primarily use for B-roll sequences and shots, and I want to be able to slow it down on my 24 frames per second timeline, so using 60 frames per second to record makes perfect sense for me there. And this is also the menu the menu part where you can activate rock steady, DJI's stabilization feature inside the Osmo Action, and I would highly recommend to use it. I think it works fairly well. I know that you will probably argue that the DJI system is even better, which most likely it is because it's newer. Last but not least, if we swipe from right to left, we'll get into the camera settings, and here I've got two things or three things for you to mention. I normally keep the camera settings on auto. This might sound a little weird, but I really do. Simple reason, it just makes my life so much easier relying on the auto mode on the camera, on the action camera underwater. What I would definitely do though is on the ISO max, limit that to 1600. I think using the camera up to an ISO of 1600 is okay. It produces nice results. If you go any higher than that on the light sensitivity, not too happy with the image then. So try to do that. And then just below that, you've got an option EV, and that's your exposure compensation basically. And what you can do here, if you're not using any lights, I would set this to 0.7. What it does is basically just overexpose all your images or all your shots by a little bit, giving a little extra light into your scene. And they can make absolute sense using a small sensor camera like an action camera underwater, where most of the time you have low light situations that you encounter. On the other hand, if you're using lights, I would not change that. I would leave it on 0, because then you've got your lights that should be responsible for getting the right exposure into your shots. Moving one further down, and we've got our settings for white balance. As I said before, white balance, I would normally use underwater white balance if you shoot without lights. If you shoot with lights, always use custom and set the Kelvin number to whatever color temperature you light output. Going down to the color profile, personally I like the D-Cinelike, the D-Cinelike it's called, which is a flat profile and will give you more leeway for color correction and grading in post-production. I never really use the normal color profile. And one further down, you've got your D-Wrap, which is basically all these action cameras, they have a bit of a fisheye look to it, and the edges sometimes can be a little distorted. You can deactivate that by activating the D-Wrap function, if that makes sense. And having that activated, the field of view is gonna become a little narrower, but you won't really see the bending on the side of your images. And I prefer that look to the fisheye bended look that you normally get if you don't activate the D-Wrap. Last but not least, format. I hear it oftentimes, the questions, Matthias, what format should I record in? The DJI Osmo Action gives you two options here. You can either record in the MOV format or the MP4, and I will personally go for the MP4 format here, simply because it is very, very widely accepted, and it's a format that across all platforms you won't have any problems utilizing and using that format and editing with that format, whichever platform you're using for your post-production workflow. And that's about it. I think that's most of the settings and features that I normally use on the Osmo Action that I've briefly covered, and now I feel like I'm a little out of breath, and I'm very happy to pass it back to you, James. If you've got any questions, fire away, and otherwise I'm curious to hear your thoughts and your settings of the GoPro that you're using.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you did a thorough job there, and a lot of the settings are very similar to the way I set up my GoPro, so I'll try and keep mine kind of consistent with the DJI equivalents, so to speak. But yeah, as you said, I've been rocking the latest GoPro, the Hero9 Black, which, you know, it's got a number of nice features. They've stepped up with the front screen, which I know the Osmo has as well now, which is really useful if you do want to shoot yourself. You've got a nice sort of, you know, framing option screen on the front of that. But let's dive into my settings. On the GoPro menu itself, really I'm just going to talk through my video settings. GoPro have worked a lot on their audio and their ProTune audio settings, but underwater I very rarely use any of the ambient noises captured by the action camera, and if I need sound effects, I'm normally going to add those in post artificially. So I don't really worry about fiddling with any of the ProTune audio, microphone settings or anything like that. We're going to talk just about the video settings that I use. First off, the first option on the GoPro is your resolution and frame rate. Now, I'm going to contradict Matthias here slightly because the GoPro Hero9 is capable of 5K, but there's a trade-off because you can only shoot 5K in 30 frames per second. Now, I've played around with clips of 5K 30, and I still think I prefer 60 frames per second in 4K, slowing it down to get that nice cinematic look when you put it on a 24 frames per second timeline. It just looks smoother, the motion looks more cinematic, so I actually negate the highest resolution that this camera is capable of, the 5K, and generally shoot 4K 60. Same as you, Matthias, I'm pretty much using this for B-roll sequences, quick shots. I also use it to give students video feedback, in which case I'm not so worried about that extra jump from 4K to 5K. And to be honest, my eyes, I really can't tell the difference between 4K and 5K at the moment. And then the very second setting on the GoPro is going to be what they call the field of view or lens type. So you have 5 different options on the GoPro, from super wide to what they call narrow. And the same thing, if you end up shooting in super wide, that is that action camera look. That is the fisheye, but it's a really forced fisheye. It's not a fisheye done for, should we say, artistic integrity, which can look good in underwater shots, particularly you know, for big fish life and getting a good like wide shot of a wreck or something like that. But it doesn't have that same sort of artistic rendering or quality. It just tends to look action camera-y. So I tend to go with the middle section, which is linear in the GoPro. So the linear is, it does, like you said, Matthias, come in a little bit. It's a little bit narrower, still has a good field of view, what would be considered a wide angle lens, but without any of that perceptual warping. Hyper smooth on. Always. This is one of the really the best things about GoPro is their stabilization. So I absolutely have the hyper smooth on. If you jump in the water and you want that action shot of you getting in the water and you've got the hyper smooth off, the footage is garbage. If you've got the hyper smooth on, it's a nice smooth ploop, and it looks fantastic every single time. So definitely hyper smooth on. And then you come down, you've got scheduled capture. Scheduled capture is just a timing device that you can set it to automatically film something. You don't want that, you want control of the shutter, so leave that off. Duration, always leave that to no limit. This is basically a file size limiting device or a space saving device, however you choose to view it, in which case if you were to leave the camera to run, it would turn off your recording after a certain amount of time, and you definitely don't want that. Again, you want control over your shutter. And then GoPro has a feature called hindsight. What hindsight basically does is, say your camera is on right now, but you're not actually filming, the lens is taking in that information and storing it on a short-term basis. So when you actually press the record button, you've got 30 seconds before you pressed that button. It's really quite an uncanny thing. I mean, we're into like Minority Report camera abilities right now. The trouble with hindsight is it chews battery, because it's basically like your camera is constantly recording a loop of 30 seconds. Every second it starts again. So it absolutely kills battery. I don't recommend it for underwater. I've played around with it a little bit, and generally the 30 seconds before you press record is just camera shake of you getting the camera in the right position anyway, and it's not really worthwhile footage. So generally leave hindsight off, timer off, zoom I leave to 1x1. The optical zoom on the GoPro, or sorry, the digital zoom on the GoPro is not brilliant, and like I said, you want that wide field of view anyway, so there's no point to punch in. On the bitrate setting, it doesn't really give you too many details. You have 2 menu options, high or low. That's it. I don't know what high is, I don't know what low is, but always choose high. for better image quality. It's going to make bigger file sizes, so that'll be a consideration when you are selecting an SD card to go into your camera. Make sure you've got enough space. But yeah, you're going to render bigger file sizes, but why would you want low quality? I don't know. Anyway. And then you can actually set your shutter speed. So if I'm shooting in 60, of course, double. So 1/120 there. And then I just learned something from you, Matthias, that the DJI Osmo, when it comes to white balance and color accuracy, has smaller increments than the GoPro. So the GoPro, you have 500 steps. So you can go up from 3,000 to 6,500 in 500 increments. So you can't do 5,600, for example. You could do 5,500 or 6,000, which is usually what I choose. My lights, like yours, put out 5,600, so I generally leave mine set to 5.5 and then just make minor adjustments when I'm editing. ISO, same, minimum 100, maximum 1600, absolutely. And I generally think in terms of sensitivity, GoPro does an okay job for an action camera. Remember, this is a $350 camera. It does an okay job of picking the right ISO. Sharpness underwater, always high, absolutely. Again, you have high, medium, and low. I don't know what the scale is for those, but underwater I want sharpness as much as possible because water will create blur otherwise. And then you have color options in terms of two profiles that GoPro give you. The first one is called GoPro, and the second one is flat. So flat is higher dynamic range, but your image is going to look flatter, it's going to look paler. Basically, if you're not going to edit the footage, if you're not going to put it into Premiere Pro or Final Cut, then shoot with the GoPro color index, all right? It's going to look action camera-y, but you're going to have a decent color rendition. I prefer to shoot in flat because I'm nearly always editing my videos before I put them out in Premiere Pro, in which case it gives me more color detail to work with when I color grade in post. After that, you're basically into the audio settings. I don't worry about the audio settings whatsoever because I'm pretty much wiping the audio from the underwater, and if I want any sound effects, I will add those artificially. But yeah, that's about it. It sounds like, and this is something, again, I'm just learning as we talk here, the DJI probably has more functionality in the menu settings than the GoPro does in terms of control when it comes to like the color index and the ISO and that kind of stuff. Would you agree?
To a certain degree, yes. I think that from what I've heard now, I gotta be honest, like my last GoPro that I've used would have been the GoPro 4 or 5, and I haven't really used any of the more current models there. It seems like there's a couple of interesting sounding and maybe useful settings and tools inside the GoPro that the DJI Osmo doesn't have, like this hindsight. I find that very interesting, and I can see your point where you say that it just chews away the battery and you don't recommend using it underwater. I can though see this be used in situations where you place your GoPro somewhere and you're waiting for a little goby or something to come out of its hole, and you don't want to have the camera running for the entire time because otherwise you're just gonna have to throw that footage away. But you can place it there and wait for the fish to start come out, or be the moray eel or whatever, and when it does come out, you can then press the record button and you will have those previous 30 seconds recorded in there as well. In such a situation, I think it makes sense for me, and I find that a tool that I would definitely experiment with and see what I can get out of using such a tool. But other than that, I think that you're right, the Osmo Action has more, or you can fine tune it a little better in terms of the color that you can pick, the color temperature. Other than that, I still think that the stabilization in the modern GoPros is going to be probably better than the rock steady that the DJI Osmo Action uses. But then again, they're action cams. So
yeah, absolutely. But that's about it. And like I said, I'm a massive fan of the action camera revolution because it's put cameras in the hands of so many more people that are creating fantastic images out there, and just it's just made it so much more accessible. So the nice thing is, hopefully with the rundown that Matthias gave you for the DJI Osmo Action and I gave you for the GoPro Hero9 Black, that you can kind of set it and forget it. You'll be on the boat before the dive, go through the settings, or even before you leave for the dive. Once you turn it off, those settings are saved in the memory, and then when you get to the dive, you turn it on and off you go and hopefully make fantastic images. Matthias, thank you so much as always for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
What a fantastic rundown. I think this gives a lot of value. I think we've really sort of hit the nail on the head here. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Divers Ready, and the Matthias Labo channel, both of which will be linked in the description of this video below. And stay tuned for next month's Across the Ocean, where we're going to be sharing our hints and tips to help you get the most cinematic footage out of your action camera, whatever model you may so choose. Until next time, my name's James in Miami.
And I am Matthias from Zurich.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.